Right, let's take a look now at the program Symphony. Remember, it is going to be a multiple movement piece, but the number of movements is going to vary depending on the story. The piece that we're going to look at is probably the most famous of the works within this particular genre, and that is Hector Berlioz's Symphonie fantastique. If nothing else, people know it because some of it was used in Fantasia. So Walt Disney, we thank him for sharing a lot of great music with people who didn't know they were getting great music. So let's talk about Berlioz a little bit before we look at this piece. He was a French composer, and he was supposed to have been studying to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it was his father wanted him to do, but he thought it was a lot more interesting to spend his time going to the theater. He particularly liked to go watch Shakespeare plays. So it happens as he's going to the play, there was a woman named Harriett Smithson who was starring in this Shakespeare production, and he just was infatuated with this woman. He was obsessed with her. This would be like today if one of us watched some movie and just fell in love with one of the actors. We just were determined to meet this person. Well, he did eventually get to meet her. But in the meantime, he has won this big prize called the Prix de Rome, and the reward you get for this is that they send you off to Rome and put you up in this lovely villa, and your whole responsibility there is to work on your art. So if you're a composer, you compose. If you're a painter, you paint, and they pay you to do that. And it's like a 3-year thing. So this is a really good deal if you're an artist. So while he's there, he's met Harriet. Things are, it's not working out particularly well yet. They haven't got together. So he writes this piece that's based on his obsession with Harriet Smithson. And that's what becomes the Symphonie fantastique. So in the story, he creates his own story, so he's not taking it from literature or someplace else. He's actually created his own story. Basically, the whole thing is one big drug-induced dream. During this period of time, opium use was pretty common, and so the main character in this, who is sort of Berlioz but not, because he's writing outside of himself, has taken these drugs, and every movement of the symphony is some other iteration of what's happening in his dreams. So there's a part where he's like out in a field and he sees her, that sort of thing. And then there's a scene where they're at a ball and just various things like that. The movement that people know the best is the final movement, which is called the Witches Sabbath movement. Now, what do witches have to do with Harriet? Remember, drugs. There are drugs involved here. So what he dreams here is that there's this mountain and the witches are gathering, and somehow the woman who he doesn't call her Harriet in the thing either. That would probably be bad form to put the woman you love's name in this sort of horrifying piece of music, but they always refer to her as the beloved. That she's there with the witches and they're having all this carousing and everything. So this big dramatic movement, which is right up the romantic ideal. This is very we got supernatural, we got witches, we got a love story, we got a guy who's on drugs. You've got everything we could do here for this story. So he's going to take all of that and put it into this movement. Now, what ties all these movements together besides the story is a little melodic theme that's known as the Idee Fixe, which means fixed idea in French. So the fixed idea always represents the woman. But it doesn't appear in the same way every time it comes around. So when it's talking about the lovely parts where they're out in the fields or at the ball or whatever, it's a very lovely kind of melody that represents her. But when we get to this point in the story and things are sort of going haywire, then it becomes more of a parody of itself, and it's sort of like it's a na-na-na-na-na kind of approach to the same theme. It's still recognizable if you've heard the entire symphony. You would say, oh, there's that theme again, but listen what he's done to it. That ties it all together. So we're going to work our way through this movement of the Symphonie fantastique. So in the beginning, our witches are gathering. We just have what he describes in his description, because he tells us what we're supposed to expect in each movement. He talks about unearthly groans and creaks and things like that. So think about every horror film you've ever seen and what kind of music that might be as we listen to the opening of the last movement of Symphonie Fantastique. All right, so you've listened to that opening section, and what you heard was some sort of odd sounds. Composers are doing different kinds of things with instruments here. So he's got the string players doing kind of chunky little sounds that you might not expect. We have some really high-pitched sounds from some of the woodwinds. All those things that would make witchy sorts of sounds for us. The theme, the fixed idea, appears. The clarinet usually plays it. Clarinet sort of ties it all together as well. And it's still fairly straightforward here because bad things have not really started to happen in this particular scene. So we'll hear it in clarinet, and then you hear it in the E-flat clarinet, which is a smaller version of it that plays really high, and you don't hear it very often because it's kind of an acquired taste, the sound of the E-flat clarinet, but it's perfectly appropriate for what he's trying to do here in terms of creating that scary sort of sound. So we have a lot of this building up and everything is going on, and we have all these little bits building together to create that sense that we are now about to have something exciting happening on our mountain. All right, so our witches are now kind of really getting ready for the big party. Suddenly we have silence, and we hear chimes. And the score tells us that those chimes are supposed to be off stage. So what he's trying to create here is the effect of bells off in the distance. So if you think about witches and what they represent, you might think that those are the church bells in town, tolling. Not in a pleasant way. It's sort of a dark sort of sound. And then this is where he introduces something that we heard when we listened to the Mass. He's going to throw in the Dies Irae theme. Dum, 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 dum. And he puts it down on these big bass instruments. So it's very ominous, very powerful. It tells us that the bad things are about to happen. Listen now to that section of the piece. Okay, so in this opening, we hear lots of unearthly groaning sorts of sounds created by various instruments. We have the string players playing with mutes, which is a little device that sort of slides onto the strings and makes it softer so we can get a spookier sort of effect. We will hear woodwind instruments at really high ranges to get the sort of screaming effect that we might expect. And then the clarinet's going to come in and bring us the fixed idea, because we need to introduce the beloved into this scene. But it's already not a happy scene. So what we have here is basically a parody of that fixed idea. So it's dum 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 dum. It has a very bouncy kind of thing. It doesn't sound at all romantic anymore. I mean, you don't think of that as being a love theme or associated with somebody that you care about. He's showing us that she's now involved in a different kind of place. So we hear that on clarinet, we hear it on E-flat clarinet, and we're really getting set up now for this beloved being taken in by all the witches. So listen to that segment of the piece. All right, so now you've heard the Dies Irae theme incorporated in here in a fairly straightforward kind of way. We're in the Romantic period now, and so Berlioz has at his disposal the tuba. So we have this big, big sound that we can also add to our Dies Irae. So now that we've introduced it and people in the audience would know that this was the theme from the Requiem Mass and therefore death is somehow involved, he can mess with it. So in this next section, what happens is he takes that same theme and he does it twice as fast. So instead of boom, boom, we now boom, 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 which creates a whole new set of tension and movement toward whatever's going to happen next. So what is going to happen next? These witches are getting ready to party now. This is time. This is the dance part. So it's the dance of the Witches Sabbath. Here's the dancing part. So we have a theme that's obviously a dance-like theme. It has all the things we think of dancing, the kind of movements and rhythmic structures that we think of. But they're witches. So it's going to be a very different kind of tonal center. We're not going with happy major keys for a witch's dance. So now go listen to see how he takes that Dies Irae and double times it and leads that into the dance of the witches. All right, the last segment of the piece takes all the things that we've had so far and sort of combines them. So we get a very polyphonic kind of approach to the structure here. So we've got the Dies Irae theme going, we've got the dance theme going, and they're going to work together. So it's just this big chaotic sound going on. They're dancing and bells chiming and all sorts of crazy sounds that really get us that sense of frenzy and chaos and wildness that we would associate with a bunch of witches dancing in the moonlight or in the darkness. So that's how he's going to tie all those bits together that we've been working with through the entire symphony. And then somehow we have to end this thing, right? Something has to happen to finish up the dance. What's going to happen? Maybe the sun comes up. Maybe somebody interrupts. But being romantic, we got to have a good big ending on it. So I want you to go back now and listen to the rest of this Dance of the Witches Sabbath from Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique.